Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. But that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy episode, and this time I'm continuing my obsessive reviewing of super zoom cameras. Now, I'll tell you, these have never been I've never been a big fan of these cameras in the past, but I fell in love with the FZ200, which is a Panasonic camera. I thought it was really an awesome camera. So I've kind of checked out a couple of these now, and usually I buy them when they're kind of phasing out, price is low. But this one I paid full freight on because it's brand new and it has some interesting features. This is the S1, so don't confuse it with the XS1 or the S1 Pro. Fuji has problems naming their cameras apparently. So we'll talk about some of the top consumer features, hobby features, outstanding features, and some flaws in this interview. Consumer features, this is definitely a consumer-oriented super zoom. It has all the stuff that most consumers would want. So it has tons of fun filters. If you want to do fisheye or selective color or toy camera or whatever, it's going to be in this camera. And most of the filters look pretty good. It also has a lot of more sophisticated consumer features. So you can do a panorama. And it's all stitched automatically in the camera. You can do a pretty decent HDR where the camera will take several different exposures of a scene and then combine them so you have better dynamic range, which means that you're not going to necessarily blow out the sky if you're shooting the mountains. You'll have a more balanced looking picture. It also has a low light function where it will take several shots and then combine them to give you less noise and a clearer picture in low light situations. That's going to be useful for still objects, not for moving objects. By the way, this cup is from the City Museum of St. Louis. An awesome place to go to if you're an adult, but especially if you have kids. Really wacky and crazy, but in a good way. You have an autofocus lamp, which I think a lot of cameras omit, which is actually nice. So in dark conditions, it gives you a little boost of light so you can focus. 1080p, 60 frames per second video, which is a high-end feature. It has this tilty screen, which tilts in all sorts of directions. Resolution is over 900,000 dots, so it's a pretty high-resolution screen for this level camera, and the screen looks pretty good. It has a fantastic grip, really deep and really comfortable to hold. So I found that I felt very comfortable holding this camera. Never felt that I was going to drop it or anything like that. The lens is not the fastest in the world, but it is faster than other super zooms. At your wide end, the maximum aperture is 2.8, which is pretty good and pretty usable. As you extend out, it goes to 5.6. Again, that's a little bit faster than other super zooms, but certainly not probably fast enough if you're going to use this and you want to, let's say, get good shots of your kid at the school play with low light or the basketball game in the gym with low light. I'm going to do some more stuff on the pictures later, and actually I'm going out into a venue tonight where I'm going to use this camera to take some low light pictures to see how they turn out. You can do some limited post-production editing like resize the picture and flip the picture and a couple other things that you might find useful. There's a bunch of hobby features. None of these are at the level of a true hobbyist camera, but they're there and they are useful. So you have full manual control with aperture, shutter, priority, and of course full manual where you can adjust both. And again, you can't fine tune them, but you definitely can control them. You have a hot shoe on top, so you could use an external flash or some other sort of device that would connect with that. You have an electronic viewfinder, which also has over 900,000 dots. So that's a pretty high resolution viewfinder. However, to be honest with you, I found the viewfinder pretty average despite that good specification. There's no photo cell to automatically flip between the screen and the viewfinder. You have to press a button to do that. No biggie, probably a cost-saving measure. And there is a diopter control, so you can get the viewfinder in focus without your glasses on, which is a pretty useful function. You can get some accessories for this camera, very limited and crazy expensive. So, for instance, a simple lens hood, which is just nothing, is $45. I'd wait for an aftermarket one. You can shoot in RAW, which is important for some people. It does have auto exposure bracketing as a hobby feature, and that's something where it will take normal exposure, overexposed, and underexposed. And this is a way that you can do HDR in software, which sometimes looks better than using the camera's built-in HDR function. However, the camera did a pretty good job, so I probably, honestly, for me, I'd probably just use the in-camera. And of course, you have that super zoom, which is a nice feature. Now, there are some standout features in this camera too, and so let me tell you about those. First of all, the super zoom is super. It's a 50 times super zoom, going from a 35 millimeter equivalent of 24 millimeters to 1200 millimeters. Now, there are other super zoom cameras that are similar, but they are a rare breed, and that is going to take an object that you can barely see and bring it right up in your face. Now, personally, I think in most situations you're not using a tripod, and really like a 20x zoom is about as much as I can hold without getting shaky. No matter what I do without a tripod, you get out to 50x. I don't care how much image stabilization this thing has. The image is going to look wobbly. And then the camera has to rely on its internal software to kind of straighten things out. It does a good job, but you get a more smeary image when you do that, although it's better than nothing. So the super duper zooms with a tripod may be okay. Just in general, for all of those massive super zooms, hand holding them, you're not going to get the impact that you want. It has, instead of just a 2-axis stabilization, optical stabilization, 5-axis. So most cameras will stabilize if you go up or down or sideways. This one will also do all kinds of other stabilizations too. That's really important, I think, with video work. It didn't seem to have as much of an impact with the still shots that I took, which was kind of unfortunate. This camera features a high-end option called focus peaking, which is often used when taking movies with movie, like video cameras. Unfortunately, when this is in manual focus mode, the way you have to focus it is with this tiny little dial, which is very awkward. So if I wanted to use focus peaking on this cup, in this right here, that I could do pretty easily. But if I was out in the field and I was trying to rapidly manual focus on something, for me anyways, that was an impossibility. So great feature, limited functionality. Would have been much better if we had a focus ring. Again, that probably would have cost more money. And even though this is an expensive camera, still with some of these advanced features, they had to cut back somewhere. It has an intervalometer, which means that you can tell the camera, take a picture every 5 seconds, every 30 seconds, whatever, and you get kind of a time-lapse view of something. I think kind of for most of us, you're not going to use it, but if you use that kind of stuff, it's built into the camera. You're not going to have to buy some accessory to do it. It does have Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi will allow you to transfer pictures directly to your smartphone or tablet, and you can also use your smartphone or tablet to control limited options on the camera. Like you could take a picture, you could view what the camera is seeing and actually take a picture from your smartphone, or flip on the flash, or do different things like that. So that's kind of a really nice feature. I don't use a lot of Wi-Fi, but I think that's just because I'm not used to it. I think once I get used to it, I probably would use it more. And it actually is a feature that I'm glad that's on this camera. But the most outstanding feature of this camera, and what differentiates it from all other super zoom cameras, is that it's weather sealed. Now that does not mean it's weatherproof. This does not mean you can take it in the swimming pool or underwater. You will ruin it. But if it rains on it a little bit, or if you get some snow on it, or even dust on it, it's protected where a lot of cameras are not. I remember taking a point and shoot out, and this was just this last winter, and it started to lightly snow, and a little snow fell on the camera, and the camera just shut off. It stopped working. Now, I was able to resurrect that camera, but I couldn't use it for the rest of the day. So weather sealing really is an outstanding feature, and would be the one reason to buy this camera if you chose to do so. But are there issues? Well, there really are, and I'm not the pickiest person in the world, so if I'm telling you there are some issues, there are some issues. The first thing is Of course, like all super zooms, this is using the size of a sensor that you would use in a compact camera. It's a 1 over 2.3 sensor, and that allows that huge zoom. However, it's not one of Fuji's EXR sensors, which are really good sensors, and they crammed 16 megapixels or 16 million pixels on a little tiny sensor. I'm sure that is for marketing, but this camera would have performed much better in my thoughts if it had like a 10 or 12 megapixel sensor instead of that gigantic number of pixels on the sensor, because really the pixels get smaller and smaller and low light gathering gets worse and you actually get a degraded image instead of a better image. Fuji's in general tend to produce more pixel artifact than other cameras, but usually it's reasonably well controlled, and I think it's just the way their engineers have figured out their algorithms for their processing. And it's not really that bad, but I would say the pixel artifact in this camera definitely was worse than most, and actually was worse than a lot of even inexpensive compact cameras that when I look back at a lot of files before I did this review, it was pretty significant. Now the camera ships in regular shots. So you have like regular or fine you can pick when it comes to taking shots. You definitely want to immediately put this in fine mode. The pixel artifacts drop down considerably when you do that to a much more acceptable level, but they're still there even at low ISOs. And we're not talking about noise now. We're talking about little like lines and dots and things that are really reflect the pixels and the processing power. So more than your typical camera, even more than your compact camera, put it in fine. It'll be better than in regular. Sharpness is acceptable in this camera, but it's not outstanding. And so I would say the images are very slightly softer. I'm moving my papers around here, pardon me. The ISO performance was a mixed bag. So these are small sensor cameras. You're not going to expect them to perform like a DSLR or a Micro Four Thirds or even an enthusiast camera with a bigger size sensor, because the sensor is really small. But they have through the years gotten very crafty with using faster lenses and using more sophisticated processors, where these cameras can produce acceptable images at higher ISOs. Usually you see a lot of smearing when that happens, a lot of loss of dynamic range, and a lot of loss of sharpness, but you can still get an acceptable image. So this camera was sort of mixed, where I was able to get some postable images even up to ISO 3200, but you actually could see noise in images even at ISO 400 or sometimes even lower. So that was surprising considering the cost of this camera. Now, I actually took a couple of shots, and these were of my son just using kitchen light, no flash, and at too high ISO, 1600 and 3200. And you can see, I know you probably can't see very well, but they're acceptable. But what you can also see, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the YouTube video, but the dynamic range is not very good, and they're pretty soft, but they're okay. The 3200 is a lot softer than the 1600, which is what you would expect. And the kind of nice thing is that when you printed the picture, a lot of the noise seemed to disappear in the print process, so that was a good thing. So some acceptable pictures, but certainly not outstanding ISO performance. Some ways a little bit better than some cameras, some ways a little bit worse. So we'll say maybe it's like average. Even though you have this awesome 1080p video, when you zoom you hear the motor going back and forth. That really kind of stinks. They did not isolate the microphones properly or put in the right circuitry to get rid of that noise. And again, probably as a cost-cutting measure, there's no microphone input jack, so you're stuck with that. Not going to be terribly objectionable for just a family video, but it is there and you will notice it. What else do I have here? I'd say overall the image quality is perfectly acceptable. In some cases looks quite pleasant. but it really did not strike me as being any better than, even under good conditions, than a typical compact camera that you could get for $100. You know, when you go into some of these enthusiast cameras, and even the enthusiast compact cameras that have slightly larger sensors, I can definitely see a improvement in picture. This one, the pictures looked nice, very nice, but really not that different from your typical compact camera. Again, they used the cheaper chip in here, probably for cost-saving measures instead of their EXR chip. I think one of the most egregious things they did, these cameras are big. To get a sharp image at that super zoom range, you are going to have to use a monopod or a tripod. So what did they do? Instead of giving you a 10-cent metal tripod mount, they gave you a plastic tripod mount, which is going to strip out on you with this big heavy camera on it, and it's going to become useless. And that is just kind of inexcusable when it would have cost almost nothing, added nothing to the price of the camera, and really will have a negative impact on your overall use of this camera over time. And they also stuck it, I don't know why cameras do this, they stuck it like right next to the battery door. So if you have a little clip on there for your tripod, you're not going to be able to open your battery door. You have to disassemble everything, which is, a lot of cameras do that, and I don't quite know why. Focusing on distant or quick moving objects is very average. So don't expect, unless you're really, really good, to be able to use this to shoot like fast wildlife or things like that. I tried doing some bird shots, and by the time we got into focus, the bird was long gone. Now that will be better if you're close up and you're not in that super zoom mode, but that's kind of why you buy a super zoom, and that's not atypical from any super zoom. Their focus systems just are not as good as, let's say, DSLRs. You don't have as much tweaking in your menus, and because you only have this one function control, you don't have a quick access control. A lot of things that you're going to want to change if you're at all an experienced photographer really do involve digging into the menu and then flipping through a bunch of stuff and going through multiple clicks to change simple things. I think they could have been implemented better by turning this function switch into just a quick access switch and just going with that. It was Fuji's decision. You know, for most consumers, it's not going to be a deal breaker because you are a consumer and you're not going to even do that. And do I have any other complaints here? No EXR, plastic tripod, too slow to use. Nah, that's about it. So what do I say about this camera? I say the one thing that differentiates it really in my mind from all other super zooms is the weather sealing, and that might be important enough for you to buy this camera just for that. The other whiz-bang features were less impressive in use than they sound, although they're quite nice. I think it all comes down to image quality, which I just wasn't that blown away with, although it was fine. It just wasn't like, wow, this is really a $500 camera. You know, wow, this is really a $100 camera. But needless to say that weather sealing does make a difference. Out of the cameras that I've reviewed so far out of this category, I'm still crazy about the Panasonic FZ200. I think that one's kind of getting discontinued, so you might be able to get a really good price on it. I will be posting a video with some still images and some video on this camera. This is already too long as it is. So would I recommend it? I would recommend it, especially if you're looking for that weather sealing. This is not going to necessarily be a good camera to do low light stuff like your kid in a play or playing basketball in a poorly lit gym. But I am going to do some shots of that tonight, and maybe I'll be proven wrong and I'll show you those in the next video. So take care. If you get some time, please give my podcast a listen. It's called Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. It's on iTunes and other podcatching sites. It's an audio podcast, completely different from this format. And as always, have a wonderful day and keep shooting that camera. Bye.